Hey friends, so today on this video we are going to focus on reading a story and answering some comprehension questions about that story. And then at the end I will show you an after reading spinner that you guys could make at home as a fun game that you could do with any story that you read at home with your parents, your siblings, your aunts, your uncles, grandparents, anything like that to practice comprehension questions when you are done reading. So the story that we're going to read is Moustache, okay? So the author is Margie Palatini. What does the author do? Okay, good. The author writes the words. Illustrated by Henry Cole. What does the illustrator do? Good. The illustrator draws the pictures. Okay, they're in charge of the pictures where the author is in charge of the words. All right, so Moustache is the title. What is this called? Good, the front cover. What is this called? The back cover. And what is this called? Holds the book together. The spine. Awesome. So the book that we're reading again is Moustache. That's the title. Now over here it says, to my dear with the 5 o'clock shadow, to Dan, Caroline, and Jim with love. Okay, so that's the dedication. That's who they're writing the book for. They're dedicating this book to those people. Okay, maybe those people had an influence on them and then made them have the idea to write this story. Okay, so before we start reading, I want you to think about some of the questions that I'm going to ask at the end. So, what happened in the story? What was the problem in the story? Okay? So what? That's the first question we're going to ask. How? How did the problem happen? How was the problem fixed? Okay? So what and how could kind of go together. What was the problem? What was the solution? How did the problem happen? How did they solve the problem? Who? Who is in the story? Okay? When we're talking about people in the story, what do we call them? Good, we call them characters. So who are the characters in the story? And when? When did the story take place? Okay? I don't have a where bubble, but we could also think about where the story took place, okay? Where the story took place, that has a name. What is the name of that? Let me think. Right, you're right. It's the setting where the story took place, okay? And there's always going to be a problem, and there's always going to be a solution. So those are the things that we need to think about. Who are the characters? Where the story took place? When did the story take place? What happened in the story? Okay? What is the setting? What is the problem? What is the solution? Okay, we can also think about what happens at the beginning, the middle, and the end of every story. Okay, so inside this story, we really can dissect it and pick it apart and really dig deep at what is happening. All right? So Moustache. Moose had a problem. A horrible, hairy, prickly problem. It grew right below his nostrils and just above his upper lip. A moustache. Okay, so already they're telling us what the problem is. What is the problem? Right, his moustache is the problem. We don't know what kind of problems it's going to cause, but they already told us right here that that is his problem. All right, so let's see what happens next. Now, not a few spare hairs or shy little stubble, no mere weak wandering whiskers on the upper lip of this moose. No siree, Moose had a big, bushy, bristly, mighty moustache. But a moustache that was a burly, surly, mangy mess and it itched a lot. Sure, he plucked and he tweezed, he even clipped, snipped, and teased, but his combs were still cowards, and his brushes rebelled. His scissors simply surrendered. Okay, so why is his mustache a problem? Good, his mustache is a problem because it was burly, surly, mangy mess. It was thick, it was big. It wasn't just a regular mustache, it was a huge mustache. Okay, and it was probably uncomfortable for him. And then I look over here and it says he clipped, snipped, and teased, but his combs were still cowards. What do we think that means? Okay, his combs were still cowards. Okay, if you think you know what that means, okay, put your answer in the comments below. And his brushes rebelled. Okay, rebelled. What do we think that means? His scissors simply surrendered. All right, surrendered. What would that even mean? All right, so if you think that you know cowards, rebelled, and surrendered, okay, what those words are meaning, what they're even saying, put that in the comments below. All right. Moose was in a frizzy tizzy. The mustache was completely crimping his style. He was a great hoofer, but he could barely bop and hip-hop with a mustache going flip-flop. Okay, so he couldn't do the things that he wanted to because of this mustache. That's why it's such a big problem. He was a wonderful chef, but he simply could not flambe his souffle with all of those whiskers in his way. Okay, I think I heard some rhyming words in that sentence too. What are those rhyming words that I heard? And he was a daring skier, but how could he downhill race with a mighty mustache blowing in his face? Moose had to do something, and soon. But what? Okay, so he couldn't do all of these things again because of his mustache. So that's a big problem. So they said, but what? How is he going to solve this problem? After days and days of much serious thought, Moose got an idea. So we kind of answered one of our questions. When? After days and days, okay, during the day, he was thinking about these things. He crossed some hair here, he crossed some hair there, and he tied his mustache around his neck. A moose scarf seemed to be the ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. Okay, so that's his first solution. Okay, the how. That's one of his solutions, to tie it around his neck to fix his problem. Do we think that that's going to work? He thinks that it's a perfect idea. So let's see if this solution works. But then his mustache got knotted and mangled and horribly tangled, and those hundreds of hairs still prickled and tickled. Worse, Moose could barely take a breath with all that mustache wrapped around his neck. Okay, so did that work? No, it didn't. So Moose untied, unwrapped, and unknotted, and gulped some fresh air. Okay, so he couldn't breathe with all that hair around his neck. So that one wasn't going to work. But he got another idea. He parted some hair this way, he parted some hair that way, and he heaped all that mustache on top of his head. Mustachioed antlers seemed to be the ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, until a squadron of squirrels and one very nosy gopher moved right into the Moose Motel. They huddled and hoarded, furrowed in and burrowed out. Okay, so he tried to put it on top of his head, but that didn't work because squirrels and gophers tried to move in. Okay, you don't want squirrels and gophers living on top of your head. Needless to say, it became quite crowded up there on Moose's head, and heavy and messy. That looks really messy. I don't want that on top of my head, do you? I don't think so. A very, very noisy. The squirrely chitty and chatting, squeals and squawks woke Moose every morning before the crack of dawn, and the gopher was giving the moose one hairy headache. Moose needed his sleep. He needed his rest. He needed his privacy. Mustachioed antlers. Nuts, said Moose. So he unparted and unpiled, untwisted and untwined, and said adios to the hairy horns. So those horns were not working out for him. So he took them off and he got rid of all of the critters that were living on top of his head. But now what? What? The miserable moose took hold of a hunk of hair and he wrestled it, then roped it. He tethered, tied, and tamed. Aha! A moose tail! Shh! Now, that was so simple. That was so easy. That was not so perfectly perfect. Talk about a dizzy do. Moose didn't know if he was coming or going. Backward, forward, this way, that. He didn't know which end was which. Moose had to bail on the tail. All right, so he tried something else, and that didn't work. And so he thought and he thought and thought some more, but no other idea was a worthy winner. Braids were a bother. A moustache sweater? Too sweltering. What does sweltering mean? He has a moustache sweater, and it is too sweltering for him. You can even see some sweat coming off of him, so it's probably too hot. A net? Not. Poor Moose. His problem was truly terrible, unbearable, just downright sad. He felt so alone. He didn't know what else to do. Then, call it fate, call it destiny. It was probably dumb luck. But one day Moose tripped on his moustache and just had no time to duck. Oomph! Pardon me, they both said as they bumped. Then they blinked, and they stared, and their hearts went thump-a-thump. She was a moose, with a bouffant so bodacious, outrageous. Well, it was just plain old big. Hair after hair piled higher than high, a skyscraping dew of glorious curls, a tower of swirling twists and twirls. She was simply splendid, stupendous, absolutely superb. Okay, these are all very, very juicy words that you guys could think about. What do they mean? And then maybe you could use them in writing sometime. Okay? Splendid, stupendous, superb. Those are great words. Of course, Moose had to ask how she did what she did to get such a do. Miss Moose winked and then whispered, "Just a little glue." So she helped he fearlessly plunge a hoof into a fat pot of the white gooey goop, and carefully, oh so carefully, they glopped and they plopped, they pasted and they pressed, they coaxed and curled every truly unruly wayward whisker. Around and around they tweaked and twirled those horrible hairs until Moose's once mangy mess was now a wondrous winding wave of marvelous moustache. Moose gazed in the mirror and smiled a broad, moosey smile. He was so happy, so glad, just giddy with glee. He looked dashing and handsome. Moose gushed, "Is that really me?" So what was the solution? Yeah, they were using goopy glue. With not a care for one hair, the moose pair boogied and bopped. They skied downhill, even uphill, and their cooking was hot, hot, hot. So they could do all the things that they wanted to do when she glued his hair back together for him. She glued his hair, and then all the things that he was trying to do before, he was able to do now. So, of course, it wasn't long after that Moose and Moustache and his beautiful bride fox-trotted and tangoed and waltzed down the aisle. Good hair days, bad hair days, they vowed to love and to cherish. And with hearts heaped with love and pots filled with goop, they both sighed, I do, glue, and promised never to part. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. And it stuck. Awesome. So we were talking about when the story took place. Okay, these are things I wanted you to think about. So when did the story take place? Okay, when was he trying to do all of these different things? Now, in the story, there wasn't really that many background pictures, okay? There were some, but there weren't a lot. Some of the backgrounds were just white. So when we could really look at the words and what the words were saying and figure out when the story was taking place, okay? We could use those clues from the story. Who was in the story? There were a couple characters in the story, okay? So who were those characters? Okay, how did they solve their problem? And what was the problem? Okay, what was his problem and how was it solved? Okay, did they just fix it in one quick idea and the whole problem was fixed? Or did it take him a couple different ideas to try to fix his problem? And it even actually took him somebody else to give him an idea to fix his problem. Okay? So here is the after reading spinner that I was talking about earlier that you guys could do after any book that you read at home. Okay? So after reading spinner. So in the middle right here, we have a little dot. Now you could take a paper clip, piece of string, yarn, anything, and you could put it right there. And I would hold it down with a pencil probably. Okay, and that's what you could use as your spinner. So it could spin around your circle. So the questions that I'm asking in the spinner is if you could change the end of the story, how would you change it? Would you still have used glue to fix his problem, or would you use something else to fix his problem? Okay, what was the main idea of the story? Was there a problem in the story? There was a big problem in the story. Okay, describe the setting. Describe the characters. What happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story? So these are questions that you could ask after any story that you guys read at home with your parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anybody. Okay? So here is the after reading spinner. If you guys want to see that, you guys can make this at home. And it's just a fun way to ask those comprehension questions when you are done reading to make sure that you understand what you are reading. All right? I hope you all loved this book.